The apartment was silent except for the soft rustle of pages as James turned through his worn copy of Invisible Cities. The evening rain tapped against the windows in an almost meditative rhythm, and the floor lamp cast everything in warm amber tones. At 28, he'd grown fond of these quiet nights. No obligations, no complications, just him and his thoughts. He never saw her coming. One moment, James was absorbing Calvino's prose about impossible cities. The next, the air above him rippled like disturbed water, and someone, fell directly into his lap with an undignified oof. Oh, God, I'm so sorry." The girl scrambled to her feet, her auburn hair tumbling around her face in wild disarray. But what made James freeze wasn't her panic apology. It was a pair of fox ears that twitched atop her head, nearly translucent in the lamplight, and the russet tail that curled anxiously behind her. "I what?" James managed, his book sliding forgotten to the floor. "I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to. I was just passing through the dimensional corridor, and there was this tremor, and..." She caught herself, her amber eyes widening. She wore a vintage dress that seemed too formal for a random appearance, and her bare feet left no wet marks on its hardwood floor, despite the rain outside. "You can see me, right? You're not at a scream." "I'm considering it," James said carefully. "Should I be screaming?" The fox girl's tail flicked, not in embarrassment, he realized, but in a sharp, deliberate pattern. Flick, flick, pause, flick. It was almost like Morse code. She smoothed down her dress with trembling hands, forcing what appeared to be a practiced smile. "My name is Iris, and that fall, totally an accident, 100% unplanned. I just happened to fall through your apartment, and..." "Your tail is twitching," James interrupted. Iris's ears flattened against her head. "Is it?" "In a very specific pattern." "I have no idea what you're talking about." She was lying, spectacularly. She couldn't hold his gaze for more than a second, and her tail continued its deliberate rhythm. Warning, pause, warning. Despite the absurdity of the situation, James found himself studying her more carefully. She was solid. He could feel the weight of her still lingering on his lap, could smell the faint scent of autumn leaves and something like copper. But there was something else, too, an electricity in the air, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. The shadows in his apartment seemed darker, more defined, as if they were watching. "Okay," James said slowly. "Let's say I believe you about the accident. Why don't you explain what those..." He gestured vaguely at her ears and tail. "Are about..." "Genetic quirk," Iris said immediately. "Very rare. My family has it." "Uh-huh. My parents are both very furry." Despite everything, James almost laughed. "You're a terrible liar." Iris's shoulders sagged. The tail continued its warning pattern. Behind her, the shadows seemed to deepen, and for just a moment, James could swear he heard whispers. Not quite voices, but suggestion of voices, like a radio tune between stations. His apartment, which had felt so warm and safe minutes ago, suddenly felt exposed. The windows seemed less like boundaries and more like thin glass, separating him from something vast and waiting. "Look," Iris said quietly, "I can't explain everything yet, but that accident, it wasn't really an accident. And I need you to trust me when I say that having me here, even though I know it's weird and confusing, might be the best thing that could happen to you right now." "That's ominous." "I know." Her tail flicked again. "And I really am sorry about that. But there are things looking for you, James. Dangerous things. The kind of things that don't care about walls or locked doors or any of the normal protections." She took a breath. "I was sent here to make sure you stay alive long enough to understand why." The rain outside seemed to intensify, and James realized his hands were shaking. Part of him wanted to demand answers, to throw her out, to convince himself this was an elaborate prank. But another part, the part that had always sensed something just beyond the edge of the ordinary, knew she was telling the truth. "Okay," he heard himself say, "but you're explaining everything. Starting now." Iris smiled, and for the first time, it seemed genuine. "Deal. But first, do you have any food?" Interdimensional travel really works up an appetite. By midnight, James's small kitchen had become their war room. Iris sat curled on his kitchen chair, barefoot, her tail wrapped neatly around her waist, while he listened to a story that rewrote everything he thought he knew about reality. "So let me get this straight," James said, pouring them both tea, because somehow discussing cosmic horror seemed better with warm beverages. "There's a hidden world running parallel to ours. My family has some kind of mark or target on it. And you're what, exactly? A guardian?" "Protector," Iris corrected, reaching for a sandwich he'd made. She ate with delicate bites despite claiming to be starving. "I work for the Keepers, an organization that monitors the boundaries between worlds. Usually, we let humans figure out their own problems. But sometimes, certain bloodlines attract unwanted attention from things that exist in the spaces between." "Things like what?" Iris's ears flattened. "The specifics would probably give you nightmares. Let's call them hunger. They're ancient, they're patient, and they've been tracking your family line for 3 generations. "Things like what?" Iris's ears flattened. "The specifics would probably give you nightmares. Let's call them hunger. They're ancient, they're patient, and they've been tracking your family line for 3 generations. She paused, her amber eyes meeting his. "Your grandfather made a deal with something when he was young. He got what he wanted, wealth, success, a long life, but he never paid what was owed. Your father inherited the debt. Now it's your turn." James felt the world tilt slightly. He'd always had an inexplicable advantage in life. Lucky breaks, unexpected opportunities, doors opening at just the right moment. He'd never questioned it, just been grateful. The thought there was all borrowed time with interest accruing in some cosmic ledger made his stomach turn. "How long?" he asked. "Best estimate? You got about 3 weeks before they come to collect. The hunger has been circling closer for months. I was sent a few weeks ago to do preliminary assessment, but circumstances accelerated. I actually wasn't supposed to arrive until tomorrow night." She hesitated. "The tremor that knocked me into your apartment, that wasn't normal. Something's breaking down the barriers faster than it should. Can it be stopped?" "Maybe." Iris set down her sandwich, and her tail unfurled from her waist, the tip flicking in that same pattern. "Warning. Hope. Warning. The original debt can be broken if you understand the source of it. Your grandfather's deal, it wasn't just about money or success. It was about power, but not the kind you'd think. He wanted to protect someone he loved." She pulled a worn photograph from her dress pocket. It was old, water-stained, showing a young couple. The man resembled James's grandfather, but the woman was whoever had been important enough to make a deal with something inhuman. "Your grandmother," Iris said softly. "She was dying. Cancer, I think, though they called it something else back then. Your grandfather made the deal to save her life. She lived another 40 years. James stared at the photograph, at the clear love in his grandfather's expression. He was trying to save her. The hunger doesn't care about motivation, but it does recognize intent. Iris leaned forward. "If you can understand the love that drove the deal, if you can honor it without accepting the debt, you might be able to break the cycle." "That sounds very nebulous for something that's supposed to kill me in 3 weeks. "It is. Fate is usually pretty nebulous until it's not." She smiled slightly. "But there's another option. I could stay. My presence here, it creates a kind of resistance. The barriers between worlds are my jurisdiction. They can't reach you while I'm actively protecting you. And the cost of that, for me, nothing. For you," she looked away, "you'd have to accept someone knowing your deepest truths. Your fears, your shame, your secrets. My kind can sense those things. It's not intrusive on purpose, but it happens. Most humans find it uncomfortable." James thought about this, watching her profile in the kitchen light. She looked so young, almost vulnerable without the supernatural context. But there was steel in her, too, in the line of her jaw, the way she held herself. Whatever Iris was, she'd chosen to be here. For him. "How long would you have to stay?" "Until we figure out how to break the deal. Or until we can't." Her tail flicked again. Warning, acceptance, warning. "I won't lie to you, James. Some of these situations don't end well. But I've been in this job for a long time, and I've learned that humans are more capable of breaking curses than anyone expects, especially when they're not facing alone. Outside, the rain continued to fall, and James realized he could hear those whispers again. Closer now, almost intelligible. His apartment, which had always felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a siege. But Iris was here, warm and real and solid in his kitchen, and somehow that made the darkness outside feel manageable. "Okay," he said. "You stay. We figure this out. But I have rules. I can work with rules. Rule 1, no more lying. If I ask a direct question, I get a direct answer. Done. Rule 2, you help me understand what I'm dealing with. Everything. I don't want to be protected by someone I don't understand. Fair." Her ears perked up slightly. "What's Rule 3? James hesitated. Then, "Rule 3 is that this isn't just about survival or debt or cosmic horror. If you're going to be part of my life, even temporarily, we do this like real people. We talk. We find out who we actually are, not just what we represent." For a moment, Iris just looked at him. Then her tail uncurled completely, the defensive posture dissolving. "I can work with that," she said softly. "I think I like that, actually." Outside, the whispers faded to background noise. James didn't know if it was because of Iris's presence or his own acceptance of the situation, but for the first time since she arrived, he felt something other than fear. He felt the possibility of something like hope. The next 3 days passed in an odd suspension between normalcy and the surreal. James went his job at the architectural firm, tried to focus on blueprints and client meetings, and failed spectacularly because his mind kept drifting to the fox girl he'd left reading on his couch. Iris, for her part, seemed to be cataloging his apartment with intense focus whenever he was home, sometimes touching the walls like she was reading something written in invisible ink. "What are you doing?" he asked on the third night, finding her tracing patterns along his bedroom doorframe. "Strengthening the wards," she said without looking away. "Your place is becoming a focal point. The hunger is getting more aggressive. These barriers won't hold if they get much closer." "How close are they?" "Close enough that I can hear them now." James felt ice in his chest. "I don't hear anything." "You will soon." Iris finally turned to him, and he saw something he hadn't seen before, genuine fear in her amber eyes. "James, I need to tell you something, and I need you to understand that I can't protect you from this part. Not completely." "What?" "The hunger. It doesn't just kill you. It consumes everything you could have become. It takes your potential, your unlived futures, and uses it as fuel. It's not just a debt collection. It's an erasure." She moved to sit on his bed, and he instinctively sat beside her. Though he wasn't sure who was comforting whom, her tail was rigid beside her, that warning pattern replaced with an anxious twitch. "Your grandfather, when he made the deal, he did get the years for your grandmother, but the hunger collected its interest from his unlived possibilities. He never became the artist he wanted to be, never traveled, never had the second child he and your grandmother wanted. His potential was consumed as payment. And my father? Similar pattern, different restrictions. He had the success, but couldn't keep relationships. Everything deep broke apart. The hunger doesn't care how it takes its due, just that it does." James understood now, with a sickening clarity, why his own life had been so charmed and so hollow. Good jobs that never satisfied. Relationships that fizzled before they deepened. Constant movement, constant acquisition, but never meaning. "So what's my unlived future?" he asked quietly. Iris was silent for a moment. Then, "That's the strange part. With you, it's not clear yet. The hunger is confused because you haven't committed to a pattern. You haven't decided what your life means yet. You're still in the space of possibility. You could become anything. That's actually what makes you dangerous to them." Dangerous? If you figure out how to break the cycle before they can lock you into a predetermined path, they lose their claim entirely. The debt becomes void. She turned to look at him fully. "You're not bound yet, James. You're the first one in 3 generations who isn't. That's why they're being aggressive. They want to consume you before you figure out who you're supposed to be." That night, James dreamed of vast hunger pressing against the windows of his apartment. Not the intelligent hunger of a predator, but something older and more absolute, the hunger of entropy itself, the universal drive to unwind all order and meaning. He woke gasping, heart pounding, and found Iris sitting at the foot of his bed. "It's okay," she said. "I'm here." The wards held. But he could see the exhaustion in her, the way her ears drooped, the slight tremor in her tail. "How much is this costing you?" "More than I expected," she admitted. "The hunger is old, James. It's been feeding on your line for 70 years. It's not easy to keep it at bay." Without thinking, James reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were cold, and she looked at him with surprise, like she wasn't used to casual comfort. "Thank you," he said, "for being here, for telling me the truth. I told you I would." "You did." He hesitated. "Rule 3 is still in effect. I want to know who you are, Iris. Not what you do, who you actually are." In the darkness of his bedroom, with the hunger pressing against his walls and their small circle of lamplight a fragile defense, Iris told him her story. She was 537 years old, though she appeared 23. She'd been a keeper for 2 centuries, had seen the boundaries between worlds corrode and shift. She'd lost people she cared about to the hunger and other things worse. She loved old books and hated most vegetables and had a terrible habit of overthinking everything. And underneath all of that, beneath the magical abilities and the cosmic perspective, she was lonely. "I'm always on the outside," she said softly, "watching humans, protecting them, but never really being part of their world. And I can't take them to mine, because it would break them. So I exist in this space between, and most of the time it feels like enough. But then I meet someone like you, and I remember what it would be like to not be alone." James squeezed her hand. "You're not alone now." She looked at their intertwined fingers like it was the most important thing in the world. "No," she agreed. "I'm not." By the second week, James stopped pretending his life was normal. He took personal leave from work, knowing he couldn't concentrate, and dedicated himself to understanding the situation. Iris taught him to sense the boundaries between worlds. They felt like temperature shifts, like the air becoming thicker, more pregnant with meaning. He learned which rooms in his apartment held the strongest wards, which objects had been subtly enchanted to resist the hunger's intrusion. But more importantly, they learned each other. Iris had moved past the pretense of being a temporary guest. Her things mingled with his. Her worn books on his shelves, her strange teacups in his cabinet, her presence woven into the fabric of his daily life. They fell into rhythms. Morning tea while discussing what she'd sensed during the night. Evenings where they studied the grandfather's journals, looking for clues to the original deal. Nights where they simply existed together in the quiet space between sleep and waking. It was during one of these nights that James realized he'd fallen in love with her. They were lying in the dark of his bedroom, Iris's head resting on his chest, her tail curled around them both like a third presence. She'd stopped being guarded around him somewhere in the second week. Now she spoke her thoughts freely, laughed without calculating the effect, allowed herself to be vulnerable. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "Not for you. Well, yes for you, obviously, but also for me. When this is over, whether we win or lose, I have to go back to the keepers, and you have to live your life. And those things don't mix well." "Who says they have to?" James asked. "The nature of reality. Reality is apparently a lot more flexible than I thought a month ago." Iris lifted her head to look at him. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that I have 3 weeks left before something cosmic tries to erase me from existence. Those 3 weeks seem too important to waste worrying about what happens after. Those weeks should be about us figuring out if we can save me, and about understanding whether what we're building here is worth the complications. It will be complicated. I know. Very complicated. Like cosmic horror levels of complicated. Still interested?" Iris smiled then, and it was the kind of smile that made James forget about the darkness pressing against his walls. She kissed him, soft and uncertain at first, then with growing confidence. It was a kiss that tasted like autumn and ancient magic, and the fragile hope of someone who'd spent centuries alone finally finding someone who wanted to know her. Afterward, they held each other while the hunger whispered and raged against their defenses. But the closer it got, the more clearly James understood something. The debt wasn't about death. It was about never becoming. It was entropy and negation and the slow erasure of possibility. And love, real, terrifying, complicated love, was the opposite of that. Love was the insistence that someone mattered, that their existence meant something, that the future they could build together was worth fighting for. On the evening of day 12, the defenses started to fail. It began with small things. Shadows that shouldn't exist crept across his walls. The whispers became almost intelligible. The air in his apartment grew cold enough to see breath, and plants began to wilt despite being watered. Iris moved through the apartment with purpose, reinforcing wards, speaking words in languages James didn't recognize, blood from a small cut on her finger writing new protection circles on the walls. "It's happening faster than we predicted," she said, and he could hear the strain in her voice. "Something's accelerating the timeline. Can we stop it? I don't know yet. We still haven't figured out how to break the original deal." She grabbed his hand. "Your grandfather, there has to be something in his journals. Something that tells us the actual words he spoke, the promise he made." They tore through the old leather-bound book again, searching through entries written in his grandfather's elegant handwriting. There were references to dates, to places, but nothing explicit about the deal itself. It was only when James noticed a journal fell open to a pressed flower, jasmine, he realized, his grandmother's favorite, that he found what they were looking for. On the inside of the back cover, written so small it was nearly invisible, were words in a different hand. His grandmother's, James thought, and they read, "Whatever you gave for me, let be undone. I would not have you hollow for my sake." "That's it," Iris breathed. "That's the counteroffer." She refused the deal before she died. She tried to revoke it. Why didn't it work? Because no one knew about it. Because the hunger ignored one voice against the contract made by the other. Iris looked at him intensely. "But the bloodline actively revokes it. If you stand in your power as the heir and say no to the debt, you might break the whole chain." "Might." Magic is never certain, but it's your best chance. Outside, the night had grown absolute. James could no longer see the city lights. The windows had gone black, and he could feel the weight of the hunger beyond them, vast and patient and hungry. The whispers had become almost words, almost names. "I'm ready," he said. Iris gripped his hand so hard it hurt. "I'll be with you, whatever happens." And in that moment, pressed between his mortality and the infinite, James finally understood what his grandfather had known 70 years ago, that some things were worth any price, and that the only thing more powerful than hunger was a refusal to be consumed. The ritual took place in James's apartment, though it hardly seemed like the same space anymore. Iris had cleared the main room, drawn symbols that burned with faint silver light, created a space that existed partially outside normal reality. The hunger pressed against every boundary, so close now that James could almost see the shadow of its shape, vast and serpentine and composed of absolute emptiness. Iris stood with him in the center of the circle, her hand never leaving his. She wore what she called her formal attire, clothes that seemed woven from starlight and authority, her ears standing proud, her tail curved in a posture that radiated quiet power. "Speak your will," she instructed, "but mean it absolutely. The hunger understands conviction." James took a breath. The words came to him not as something rehearsed, but something true. "I am James Martin. I am the heir to a debt I did not make. I am descended from a man who loved someone enough to bargain with hunger itself. But I am not my grandfather's mirror. I am not my father's echo. I am my own becoming, and I refuse to pay the price of their choices with my own unlived life." The hunger recoiled, pressing back. The shadows in the room convulsed. "My grandmother refused this debt," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "And I refuse it now, not because I don't honor what my grandfather did, but because I do. I honor it so much that I choose not to make him carry the weight alone. I break the cycle. I revoke the contract. I return what was owed to the only power that granted it, the infinite itself." He pulled his hand away from Iris and opened his palm. The hunger surged forward, a roaring absence, the sound of all possibility being unmade. But in that moment, James understood something profound. The hunger fed on fear, on resignation, on the acceptance of erasure. He did none of those things. Instead, he laughed, not in hysteria, but in genuine joy at the absurdity of it all. Here he was, completely ordinary, with nothing special about him except that he was stubborn and had someone who believed he was worth saving. "Take nothing from me," he commanded the void. "I am becoming, and you have no claim on what I choose to become." And then Iris was there, pulling him backward into her arms, and the wards flared with blinding light. The hunger shrieked, a sound like reality tearing, and was suddenly, impossibly sealed away. The shadows retreated. The whispers faded. The cold lifted like a physical weight being removed from his chest. The windows cleared, and James saw the city lights again, steady and real and wholly possible. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Iris released him and stumbled backward, her form wavering, her ears drooping with exhaustion. "Iris!" James caught her as she fell. "I'm okay," she murmured. "Just tired." That took a lot of energy. "What happens now?" "Now!" She smiled weakly. "Now you live. You get to decide who you want to become without the shadow of erasure hanging over you. You get possibilities again." James held her tighter. "And you?" "I have to report back to the keepers. Explain what happened." She paused, and he felt her heart beating fast against his chest. "But I don't have to leave immediately. And after, I'm going to request a reassignment to the human realm, if that's allowed." "Is it?" "It's incredibly complicated. Against protocol. Probably career-ending if they decide to be rigid about it." Her tail twined around them both. "But I've been thinking about what you said, about not being alone anymore. I don't want to go back to existing in the spaces between. I want to choose something. And if you're willing, I choose you." In the quiet of his apartment, with the ordinary city sounds filtering back in, James kissed her, not with desperation or gratitude, but with a kind of tenderness that promises a future. Not certain. They had no guarantees about what the keepers would allow, what complications might arise from a liaison between worlds. But possible. Absolutely, completely possible. "Okay," he whispered. "Then we figure out together." Outside his window, the rain began to fall again, gentle and clean. Inside, in the warm light of his apartment, two beings from vastly different worlds held each other and began the strange, wonderful, terrifying work of building something that had never quite existed before. A future neither of them had expected. A love that broke the rules. A becoming that was theirs alone to define. And somewhere in the spaces between worlds, the hunger faded into dormancy, its claim finally, absolutely broken.